I understand, but my priority right now is my family. I'll be back when my leave is over.
This is unacceptable, Anne. We can't afford to have you away for so long. If you don't come in, I might have to consider other options, like letting you go. I was also planning to make you the office manager.
No thanks. I will come back when my leave is over. Hi, I'm Anne. I want to tell you about my time after university, working at a law firm and meeting my husband, Max. I liked my job, even though it had some tough parts. While I was working, my boss, Robert, started acting in a way that made things very difficult for me. Let me share a couple of moments to show you what I mean. In a meeting, my colleague Sarah had a great idea to solve a problem. Everyone was excited about it, but when we talked about it, Robert took credit for the idea, making Sarah upset. It showed that he cared more about himself than the team. During a presentation to new clients, I suggested a creative idea to make our pitch better, but Robert quickly dismissed my idea and focused only on his own. This made it hard for the team to work together. At a celebration of a successful third quarter, Robert talked a lot about his achievements, ignoring the team's hard work. It seemed like he just wanted attention for himself. I had one project that I was proud of, and spent hours working overtime and taking the work home with me. Robert took credit for it again. I was angry and met with him to get some answers. Robert, we need to talk about the Miller project. I worked hard on it, but you took credit without saying I did anything.
Well, Anne, it's about the final report. I added a few concluding remarks. The bosses need to know who's making things work here.
I get that, but I'm the one who figured out how to save money. I want people to know I did that.
Come on, Anne. We're a team. What's mine is yours, right?
I want credit for my hard work. It's not fair for you to say it's yours.
Anne, you're too focused on getting credit. I make sure you get paid, don't I?
No, it's not enough. I did the work, and I want people to know. It feels bad when you say it's all yours.
The door is there if you want to leave.
I like my job, and I don't want to leave.
Well then, take it or leave it. I am busy now. Get back to work.
I pressed on despite the problems with my boss. I needed the money, so I said nothing. I tried to forget about my boss by focusing on my social life. I went out with my friends, and one of them introduced me to a young man. I found happiness in my relationship with my new boyfriend, Ben, who passed the bar exam and became a lawyer. As we spent more time together, Ben and I started talking about getting married. We shared dreams and supported each other. Soon we decided to get married in Las Vegas over a weekend in July. It was a sudden decision, but it felt right. When I went back to work after the wedding, I was excited to share the news with my colleagues. They were happy for me, and many brought me cards and gift certificates. Everyone except one person. My boss, Robert, looked away whenever my workmates asked me about the wedding. Instead of feeling happy for me, he added more assignments to my already heavy workload. I was forced to work overtime and even on weekends, leaving me with little time to spend with my new husband. The demanding work hours created a strain on our fresh marriage. Ben, I miss spending time with you. These long work hours are making it tough.
I feel it too, Anne. It's like we're ships passing in the night.
I thought things would get better after the wedding, but it's even busier now.
We need to find a balance. Our time together is important.
I agree, Ben. I want to make more time for us, despite the crazy schedule. Even though I worked a lot at the office, I found out I was going to have a baby. Juggling work and getting ready for a baby was tough. Most of the time I was pregnant, I kept working hard, trying my best with all the office stuff. Knowing a baby was coming made me happy but also stressed. When there was just 1 month left before the baby was due, I decided to take some time off. I had a note from the doctor saying it was okay. But my boss got mad, even though I followed all the rules. It felt like taking time off for something important, like having a baby, was a problem for them. I didn't care, and I took all my things and told them I would be coming back after my maternity leave was over. During my time off, I wanted to focus on taking care of myself, getting ready for the baby, and spending time with my partner. As the baby's arrival got closer and my stomach was getting bigger, I was feeling anxious and happy. My husband was also excited and wanted to get the house ready. To make things better, my husband found a bigger house for our family. We bought it and moved, giving us more space and a fresh start. Moving to this new place was a great feeling and a relief. It had the room and comfort we needed for our family. However, 2 weeks after the baby was born, I got a call from the boss.
Anne, we need you back at work immediately. There's a lot to catch up on.
I'm on maternity leave, Robert. I need time with my newborn. I have a child.
This isn't a vacation, Anne. We have deadlines to meet, and your absence is causing problems.
I understand, but my priority right now is my family. I'll be back when my leave is over.
This is unacceptable, Anne. We can't afford to have you away for so long. If you don't come in, I might have to consider other options, like letting you go. I was also planning to make you the office manager.
No thanks. I will come back when my leave is over. I hung up the phone. Despite my tough talk, I cried. We had a big mortgage to pay, and we couldn't afford the payments if only my husband worked. Still, Ben told me not to go into the office the following week. In the morning, I received a registered letter from the office stating that I would no longer be required to come to work due to some changes in the office. I was so shocked that I almost dropped the milk bottle that I was using to feed the baby. I called my husband at work, who was surprised and angry. He said he would help me sue the company due to wrongful dismissal. But I told him I needed a good reference, and I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to find a good job if the boss didn't recommend me. My husband told me to have faith, and he told me not to worry about this. Feeling treated unfairly as a mom, I decided to do something about it. I agreed that I needed to sue the company because they treated me poorly for having a family. I thought they fired me just because I took time off for my pregnancy. It was tough, but I wanted to show that I was good at my job and that being a mom shouldn't mean losing it. I must share my story and prove that it's not right for companies to treat people badly just because they have a family. I wanted to stand up not just for myself, but for everyone's right to be treated fairly at work. The day came for the court case, and I faced up against my old boss, Robert.
Your Honor, the reason we had to let Anne go was her consistently shoddy work. Her incompetence hurt important projects, and we couldn't afford the mistakes any longer.
This is untrue. The only reason why I got fired was because I got pregnant and went on maternity leave. I needed time to take care of my baby, and this company discriminated against me. I have never been more hurt and saddened. I feel I am punished for having a child.
Your Honor, Anne has a track record of dedication and success in her role. We have evidence of her great performance reviews. These allegations are an attempt to justify unfair treatment.
The court took a few days to deliberate, and after some worrying hours, the judge said I was right. I got $200,000 because they fired me unfairly, along with additional fees for loss of income. The company even had to pay for my lawyer and all the court costs too. Surprisingly, my friend from my former company told me the person who treated me badly, Robert, got fired. But only after the company sued Robert in order to recoup the money they had lost because of his actions. They managed to win their case, and Robert was on the hook for the $200,000 that I had won. As if that wasn't enough, several women saw his name in the news and came forward and charged him with sexual harassment, and the judge found him guilty. The company let him go without giving him his pension. Now, I'm happy working at a new place, and my husband and I are thinking about getting a German Shepherd. I read in the paper that Robert had been sent to prison for sexual offenses and had been sentenced to serving 15 years. It feels good when bad things happen to bad people in real life. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
Hey, baby girl.
Mother, what are you doing with this guy?
He's my new husband, and don't criticize him. He's better looking than your dad.
Shut up! I will never accept him as my father.
You don't have to. Get out!
What do you mean? I live here too.
No, you don't. Get out. I don't want to see you anymore. My new husband is living here now.
Hey, I'm Jordan. When I was growing up, I lived with my mom, Emily, and Frank in the countryside. It's a bit different from the usual stories because, in our house, I was the one who had to do all the chores, not my brothers. Our home was surrounded by green hills and endless meadows. Even though the scenery was nice, my childhood was filled with sweeping floors, washing dishes, and taking care of the farm animals. I was the one with all the work, while my brothers, Eric and Jared, got to enjoy themselves without lifting a finger. My mom felt they were not cut out for farm work. Not only did I have to do all the tasks, I didn't have much time for myself. My mom was also not very good at making me like myself.
You dress like a boy, Jordan.
That's because I have to carry and lift the soil and do all the work.
No wonder no one wants to go out with you. You are plain-looking too. When I was your age, I was so much more good-looking.
Maybe you can help me look better.
What for? No one would be interested in you anyway.
I hated my mother growing up. For years, she would also criticize my cleaning, and she never stopped saying how much I was a terrible cook and would never make anyone a good wife. I felt terrible, and many nights I ended up crying myself to sleep. By the time I turned 18 years old, I had enough and moved to a different town to go to a community college and become a teacher. I applied for a student loan, so I was happy to get out of my family for a while. A few years later, I came back home to visit and learned that my dad was alone because my mom had run off with an old high school friend she found on Facebook. My dad was the total opposite of my mom. He was quiet, calm, and never liked getting into arguments. However, his flaw was that he never stood up for himself or for other people like me. My mom was the aggressive one in the family, and he always backed down and let her have her way. Still, Dad agreed to divorce Mom. My brothers were not at home, and both finished high school and decided to backpack around the world. While I was gone studying for my teaching degree, I learned that my mother had cleaned out my room and sold off some of my prized record collections, as well as autographed copies of some singers. I was angry, but couldn't do too much because my mother was not around. After the divorce, I continued to teach in the city, and Dad hired people to help look after the farm. He didn't feel confident that my brothers were around enough to work. One day when I went home, I heard a familiar voice.
Hey, my little duckling.
Hi, Mom. What are you doing here?
Your father and I are back together, just so you know.
Really? I thought you got married and lived in Europe.
Donald? That bum. All he did was go to casinos and laze around the household. That idiot said he worked for the bank, but he was just a mail sorter.
Well, I am happy you and Dad are back together again.
Just so you know, next time you choose to drop in, call first. It's rude to drop in.
But we are family.
What, you bitch? You don't remember when you turned 18, you left and walked away, leaving us to feed the animals and milk the cows. Jared and Eric are not made for this type of work, only you. You left us with lots of work.
Fine, see you. I left the house angry at my mom once again, but before I turned my back, I kissed my dad goodbye. He didn't respond much, and I suspected that at the age of 65, he may be having symptoms of dementia. I felt bad about leaving, but promised to stay in touch. For the next 5 years, I dropped in around Christmas time to visit with my dad, who was now confined to a wheelchair. My mother urged me to stay on to care for my dad because she wanted to go to Europe and travel with my brothers. I quit my teaching job to care for my dad. I also took care of the animals, and it was as though everything was back to when I was a child. It wasn't long before my dad passed away, leaving the house to my mother. She didn't attend the funeral because she said she hated to be depressed. She told me to write to her and tell her all about it. My brothers declined to attend as well. Finally, one day, my mother arrives with a man who is her age. He looks Greek, and his name is Stephos. She takes me to another part of the house and tells me something shocking.
Hey, baby girl.
Mother, what are you doing with this guy?
He's my new husband, and don't criticize him. He's better looking than your dad.
Shut up. I will never accept him as my father.
You don't have to. Get out!
What do you mean? I live here too.
No, you don't. Get out. I don't want to see you anymore. My new husband is living here now.
I was so surprised. I hurried to my room and packed a few things. I planned to go back to the city and look for a job as a teacher. Times were tough, but I managed to find a job as a trainer for a tech company. I eventually got training gigs in various countries, including Singapore and Germany. One day, when I was at my 12th floor office in downtown London, Eric, my brother, texted me with an important message.
Baby sister, how are you doing?
Not too bad. Going to hang out with friends at the newest Michelin star restaurant? How's everything?
Terrible. Mom's been drinking a lot. She and her new husband, Stephos, are always fighting nightly. Sis, I need some money to get my car out of the ditch.
Ask Mother. Where's your money?
I don't have any. Mother never encouraged me to get a job. Jared and I finished high school and hoped to make money as an influencer on TikTok. But we partied too much and can't concentrate on the videos. You are the one with the skills. We don't even know how to work at a fast food restaurant.
Not my problem. I showed you how to take care of the animals, but you and Jared never seemed interested, always caring about going on the next trip.
All the money's gone, Jordan. My mother and her new husband made some bad investments. We are all going to lose our house and family farm. You gotta help us.
No way. It was true. My other brother, Jared, also called me to explain that the family farm would be on the auction block. My mother and her new husband were kicked out and living in a tent in a park. Jared asked me to help buy back the farm for $100,000. I said I would think about it and hung up. Because I managed to make some wise investments, I made a few inquiries and talked to a lawyer to help me buy back the family farm. After a few calls, I was the successful bidder. As soon as I bought back the farm, I took a look at the books, and I figured that I could expand our current milk business and add other products like cheese, eggs, honey, and other items. I would focus on organic products. Fortunately, many of the big grocers took on my wholesale business, and everything was booming. One day, while I was out making sure the animals were healthy, I received a visitor.
My daughter, my only daughter. I need your help.
What are you doing here? Can't you see that I am busy?
Don't treat your only old mom like this. I just kicked my alcohol habit and got rid of Stephos. Let me come live with you and help you out. I have great business ideas.
Get out of here. You're only my mom in blood only. You never treated me like a daughter and always insulted me. I don't care about you anymore. Crying? You know how many days and nights that I cried when you abused me when I was young and kicked me out of the house when I was older.
I was not thinking. I loved you always.
My mom spent the next 10 minutes pleading with me to take her back. But I turned a blind ear and I had to get a few of my farm helpers to kick her out of the property. A few weeks later, I got a text from Eric that him and his brother were in a Mexican jail because they were caught selling drugs to locals in Los Cabos. My mother was also in the female section of the prison. My family members were caught dealing drugs. Eric asked for my help, but I refused to help them with lawyers or provide them with any other consular assistance. I had enough with my family and refused to forgive them for my abusive childhood. Today, my business is thriving, and I am dating a local farmer, Daniel, who cares about me. I don't communicate with my family anymore. What would you do? Do you think I am too harsh?
Bella, get over here right now.
What is it, ma'am?
I just used the upstairs bathroom and it's dirty, so get up there and clean it.
That's gross. Why don't you clean it yourself?
Because I'm too old, and Joe shouldn't have to clean it. After all, he is the breadwinner.
Well, hello there. My name is Bella, and I am 26 years old. A while ago, I got married to a man named Joe, but things didn't turn out to be the dream I had always wanted it to be. More specifically, my mother-in-law was an absolute nightmare, and so was Joe. But let me start from the beginning. We met while we were both vacationing in Paris. We actually met right under the Eiffel Tower, if you can believe it. I was sad at first, because I thought that he was from France, but it turned out he lived only a few towns over from me. When we found this out, we quickly began dating. On our first date, I opened up to him about how I was unable to find a job after college, and that I had been working at a pet store in the meantime. This was something I was very insecure about because I always wanted to make a lot of money. He assured me that it was nothing to be ashamed about and told me that he was actually a doctor. I couldn't believe I was dating a doctor. He was so dreamy and we had so much in common, especially our love for animals. He said he almost became a veterinarian, but his father was very strict growing up and demanded that he become a medical doctor, not just a doctor for animals. Me and Joe continued to date for months, and I began to realize that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. I know it might not be customary, but I was actually the one to propose to Joe. I just loved him so much, and I wanted to start our family. Luckily, he said yes, and we began to plan our wedding. The first time I met my awful mother-in-law was at our wedding, and she made a comment to me that I'll never forget.
You're the bride? Are you serious?
Yep, I'm Bella. Is something wrong?
This is disappointing. I thought you would at least be beautiful.
Mother, be nice. This is my wife now.
Joe later explained to me why his mother had acted so inappropriate. He told me how, as she was getting older, she was losing her memory and becoming a mean old woman. He told me that I wouldn't have to deal with her very often because she lived so far away. We enjoyed the rest of our wedding, and my family loved Joe. A couple of months later, Joe got some bad news. He learned that his mother's house had burned down and that she needed a place to stay.
Baby, I'm going to offer to have my mother move in with us.
Well, I hope she will be nice to me. Is there anywhere else she can go?
She's my mother, Bella. It is my duty as her son to take care of her.
I guess you're right. Even though I hated the idea of his mother living with us, I bit my tongue. When Joe's mom was finally moved in, she immediately started causing problems. For one, she used all the hot water while she was showering and completely disregarded the fact that I needed some. Then she began eating all of the food in our house and would demand that I go and get more for her. This I could deal with, but then things began getting even worse.
Bella, get over here right now.
What is it, ma'am?
I just used the upstairs bathroom and it's dirty, so get up there and clean it.
That's gross. Why don't you clean it yourself?
Because I'm too old, and Joe shouldn't have to clean it. After all, he is the breadwinner. What do you do if you don't cook and clean? You make no money, you're just a lousy pet store worker.
Joe's mom's words cut deep, but still she had a point, and I went upstairs to clean the toilet. The next day, things got even worse when I went into work. My boss approached me and told me he needed to talk to me.
Bella, I have some bad news. We have some budget cuts, and you're fired. I'm really sorry about this, but there's nothing I can do.
I ran home crying after I heard this, because now I really had nothing. Joe was the one making all the money, and now I would just have to stay home and take care of his horrid mother. When I got home, I was reminded of what I would have to be dealing with.
Why are you home so early?
I got fired.
Wow, so you really are a loser, aren't you? I knew you weren't going to be good enough for my son. Now be a good wife and start cleaning.
It felt like my life was falling apart. I spent the whole day cleaning and waiting on my mother-in-law, listening to her barking orders and sharp insults. That night, I researched ways I could possibly make money online, and I finally came across freelance writing. I was always good at writing in school, and I decided I would give it a try. I made an account and quickly got my first orders, and after that, orders were coming in at an amazing rate. Safe to say, my mother-in-law was not a fan of this new job.
What are you doing? Why aren't you making me a sandwich, you ugly loser?
Don't talk to me like that. I'm working and I'm actually making great money, so leave me alone.
If you don't get in the kitchen and start cooking or cleaning, I will be telling Joe you haven't been a good wife.
Go ahead. I don't care what you say anymore. I was sure Joe would understand that what his mother told him wouldn't be true, but I would be mistaken. When Joe got home, he had an angry look on his face, and he told me his mother had called him and told him that instead of cleaning and taking care of her, I was working.
Why aren't you taking care of my mother? Isn't that what you're for?
Excuse me? I'm your wife. You're supposed to love me. Besides, I'm making a lot of money freelance writing, almost as much as you now.
Yay, right. And sure, I love you, but only if you do exactly what I say and take care of my mother.
Well, if that's the way it's going to be, then I don't want to be married to you anymore.
Good. Let's get a divorce then. You're no good anyway. Plus, I've been cheating on you since the day after we got married.
I couldn't believe Joe had deceived me this whole time, and he had turned out to be a completely different person. Although I was sad my marriage was falling apart, my career was going great. The next day, I was contacted by a Hollywood agent who hired me to write a movie starring some of the biggest names in the film industry. I wrote the best movie Hollywood has ever seen, and just like that, I was making millions of dollars, far more than Joe ever had. Nope.
Where are you getting all this money? Did you steal it?
Nope, I earned it. Now where are those divorce papers? It's time I get rid of you and Joe for good.
They're right here, but wait. Now that you're rich and famous, I changed my mind. I want to stay together, I'll stop cheating on you, and I'll kick my mother out.
Absolutely not. I'm on to bigger and better things now. I guess you just couldn't handle me being the breadwinner, you just had to go and ruin everything. I signed the divorce papers and kicked both Joe and his mother out, because since the house was bought in my name, I technically owned it, which Joe was furious about. Things finally felt at peace with those two finally out of my life. I was getting offers left and right to write more award-winning movies, and I was making more money than I knew what to do with. Just then, there was banging on my door. I went over to the door and almost fainted at what I saw. It was Joe and his mother standing outside of my door with a gun. They were demanding that I let them back in and that I supply them with $1 million. I learned later on that Joe and his mother had moved out and got a place together, but quickly started spending irresponsibly. Joe had picked up a habit of gambling, and his mother bought tons of expensive jewelry, which left them broke. Joe still had access to my bank account for some reason, and showed his mother all of the money I had been making, which gave her this evil idea to rob me. I had to think quickly, so I came up with a lie. I told them that the door was stuck, and that I'd let them in once I go get a tool to fix it. I quickly called the police and begged them to come quickly. It only took a few minutes for the police to arrive, and see Joe and his mother threatening me with a gun. They quickly handcuffed them, and only then did I feel safe enough to open the door. How dare you guys try to pull a stunt like this?
You don't deserve that kind of money. We do.
She's right. A woman's place is in the kitchen.
Look how low you've fallen, Joe. It's embarrassing. Have fun in prison. I saw later in the news that Joe was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and his mother was sentenced to 8 years as well. Joe begged me to bail him out of jail with all of my newfound wealth, but I refused. I even heard from one of my friends that works in the prison that Joe's cellmate is extremely aggressive and beats him up every night. As for his mother, well, she had to take up a job of cooking and cleaning in prison, just to get a little money so she could spend it on cigarettes. I even heard that Joe had his doctorates revoked, so that even when he is released, he will never be able to be a doctor again. Personally, I think he and his mother both deserve it. What do you think? Jason tried the doorknob and found that the house was unlocked. Worried, we went inside and found all 3 boys lying on the floor in the living room. There were all kinds of empty beer bottles and even an empty liquor bottle lying next to them. Both Nolan and William looked extremely pale, and when I checked them, they had no pulse. Jason went over to Craig and said that he had one, but that he could barely feel it. Hi there. My name is Emily, and I live in a quiet suburb where everyone knows each other. Or at least I thought that we all knew each other. Things have become very strained and chaotic lately, and I'm not really sure if my husband and I made the right choices. Maybe after you hear my story, you could let me know if you would have done anything differently. You see, it all started a few years ago. My husband Jason and I had 2 sons, Nolan and William, and they were 12 and 10 years old at the time when one of our neighbors, Scott, asked us if Nolan would be interested in joining the local baseball team that he coached. We knew that Nolan loved to play sports, and so we eagerly signed him up. It didn't hurt that Scott had a son that was Nolan's age named Craig, and we figured that it would be a great way for Nolan to make a new friend, especially one that lived only a few houses away from our own. All summer, the boys would hang out with one another and would go to practice and games together. Nolan would get rides from Craig's father to their practices and games, which was really nice of him. Of course, we still attended Nolan's games and cheered him on when he was at bat or if he made an important play. However, all of this joy would quickly fade. In the fall, the boys went to school and baseball ended for the year. However, Nolan and Craig remained good friends and continued to hang out with one another until a week before Halloween. Nolan mentioned that he was going over to Craig's house to talk with him about what they were going to wear for Halloween, but that he would be back in time for dinner. William asked if he could go too, and Nolan said that it would be okay, and so the 2 of them left. As Jason and I were putting the final touches on dinner, I called Nolan's cell phone, but got no answer. After a few more attempts, I began to get worried, and so Jason and I went over to see why our sons weren't answering their phones. When we got to Craig's home, all the lights were off, and no one was answering the door. Angrily, Jason tried the doorknob and found that the house was unlocked. Worried, we went inside and found all 3 boys lying on the floor in the living room. There were all kinds of empty beer bottles and even an empty liquor bottle lying next to them. Both Nolan and William looked extremely pale, and when I checked them, they had no pulse. Jason went over to Craig and said that he had one, but that he could barely feel it. In a state of panic, we quickly called 911 and begged them to send help as soon as possible. The rest of the night was a complete blur, as paramedics arrived and tried to save the lives of all 3 boys. Unfortunately, Nolan and William were pronounced dead when the paramedics arrived, as they had no vital signs for far too long, and Craig passed away while on his way to the hospital. Somehow, all 3 boys had passed away from alcohol poisoning. We were beyond stricken with grief, and we demanded to know how this could have happened to our children. I tried to contact Scott and his wife, but could never get through. We just assumed that they were just as heartbroken as we were and didn't want to speak to anyone until we spoke to their next-door neighbor.
I'm so sorry to have heard about what happened to your boys.
Thank you. It's been really difficult.
I just wish I had said something sooner. Maybe all of this could have been avoided. What do you mean by that? Well, I had seen Craig drinking before, and I knew that it was very odd. I had tried to say something to Scott before, but he just dismissed it as boys being boys.
I was beyond furious. I knew that it wasn't fair to blame Craig, but for Scott to have known that Craig had been drinking before in the past, and to not take actions to prevent him from continuing to do so, was unconscionable. As soon as we had heard this, we stormed over to speak with Scott. Scott! We just heard that you knew all about your son drinking in the past. Why didn't you warn us of this? For crying out loud, our boys are dead because of you. Scott looked down at his feet and looked like he felt very guilty, but it bought him absolutely no sympathy from us. Don't just stand there looking at your feet. Say something.
I'm sorry that things went too far.
That was all he said before he ran into his house and locked the door behind him. I wanted to break down the door and keep yelling at him, but Jason grabbed me and dragged me away. I knew that it was the right choice to make, but I was still furious. Over the next couple of years, we did our best to heal, but it was incredibly hard, and our marriage had a few rocky points, but we healed together, and I'm happy to say that Jason and I are in a very good place together. However, my anger towards Scott had never gone away. As such, I always kept an ear open to his whereabouts and what he was up to. I knew that it was a bit unhealthy, but he had become something of an obsession for me, and recently I had even felt that it was time to just let things go. But then I heard something that renewed my suspicion of him. A few months ago, I had heard that he had begun teaching baseball again. That wasn't the thing that caught my attention, but rather, there was a rumor that some of the boys that he was teaching had been caught drinking. There was something about that made me really get invested in finding out more. There was a real possibility that he was letting more boys drink, and after what had happened to our sons, I wasn't going to let it happen to someone else's parents. To follow him around in my car and seeing where he went. Then one day I saw him pull into a liquor store, and when he came out, he was carrying a case of beer. Something told me that I was onto something until I saw that his next stop was a drugstore. That made me very confused, but I didn't really know the reasoning as to why he would do that, and so I just kept following him. What I saw next really shocked me, though. He went straight to the baseball diamonds, which were oddly empty. In order to not arouse suspicion, I parked far enough away that he wouldn't spot me or my car, but close enough that I could keep an eye on what he was up to. He got out of his car and grabbed the case of beer as well as the shopping bag that he had picked up at the drugstore. He then went into the changing rooms. Several minutes passed and he hadn't come out, when suddenly a boy wearing a baseball uniform riding a bicycle rode past me and headed towards the changing room. He placed his bike along the wall to the changing room and went inside. I waited another 10 minutes and no other players showed up. I became concerned and drove up behind Scott's car and slowly crept into the changing room. I was not prepared to see what awaited me inside, though. The baseball player was lying half naked on the floor, passed out, and Scott was beginning to undress. The way he was looking at the boy made my skin crawl. And feeling enraged, I ran up and kicked Scott as hard as I could in the crotch, and then grabbed the boy and fled out to my car, where I drove as quickly as I could home. I didn't know what else to do, but as I drove away, I saw Scott run out to his own car and give pursuit. While driving, I called my husband and told him to gather up the entire neighborhood and wait for me in our driveway. I honestly didn't have a plan, but I wanted witnesses just in case Scott tried anything dangerous. As I pulled into the driveway, I checked and saw Scott pull in behind me. Before I could grab the unconscious boy from the back seat of my car, he ran up to me with his hands in the air.
Wait! I can explain everything. Please, Emily, just calm down. There's no need to make this any worse than it already is.
Oh no, I know exactly what I saw. I know exactly what you were intending to do, you monster. As if on cue, the garage door opened up behind me, and Jason, along with all of our neighbors, emerged from inside our garage. Scott drugged the boy in the back seat of my car and was planning to assault him. I got there just in time to prevent him from being able to do so. Just then, One of the older teenagers stepped forward from the crowd. He was our neighbor's eldest son, and in previous years he had Scott as a coach.
It's true. And he wouldn't have been the first. I've been keeping this a secret for a long time, but I can't keep silent and let it keep happening. He even used to do it to his own son as well. Scott is a truly evil man. He used to bring beer to games, and sometimes I would pass out. And when I woke up, I knew what happened. But I felt so much shame that I kept quiet.
I felt sick to my stomach as I realized that that was probably what had happened to our sons, only maybe he had given them too much of whatever it was that made them fall asleep. As soon as Jason realized this as well, his vision went red, and he screamed out in fury and he attacked Scott. However, he wasn't alone. Everyone there attacked him as well. The mob descended on him, and I was amazed that he was even still alive when the police finally showed up. I don't know who called them, but they had arrived just in time. They managed to get everyone off of Scott, and after everyone had told them why they had attacked him, they handcuffed him and threw him into their squad car. The weeks that followed saw my husband as well as several other members of the mob that attacked Scott get basically a slap on the wrist for their part in what happened. They were given some community service hours and fined, but nothing more serious than that. Scott, however, stood trial for what he had attempted to do to that boy. As if that wasn't bad enough for him, though. Once it came out that he had been arrested for trying to assault a boy, dozens of men of various ages came forward and accused him of also assaulting them. As a result, Scott was charged with dozens of counts sexually assaulting children. All of the charges stuck as well, and not only was his name ruined in the community, but he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. The last I heard was that he spends more time in the infirmary, though, than in his actual cell. It seems that his fellow inmates don't care for him very much and attack him constantly because of his crimes. As for Jason and I, well, we couldn't stay in that city anymore, and we have moved far away. We feel a strong amount of closure for finding out exactly what happened to our sons, and although knowing what happened won't bring them back, it is a relief to know that their killer is facing justice for what he did. Both of us wish that we had found out before he had hurt our sons, but we will just have to settle for making sure that he can never again hurt anyone else. So, put yourself in my shoes. Would you have done things differently?
The second that he saw me, he tried to rush towards me in a fit of rage and was tasered and fell to the ground unconscious, at which point the police handcuffed him and dragged him out to their squad car. Hi there, my name is Austin, and I'm 31 years old. These past 2 years have been very rough, and unfortunately, my brother-in-law hasn't made things any easier for me and my children. So it all started 2 years ago. My wife and I were on vacation when she fainted. At the time, we didn't think much about it and just figured that it happened because of heat exhaustion. But once we returned home, it began to happen more frequently. Concerned what it could mean, she went to see a doctor about it and found out that she had terminal brain cancer, and within a few months, she was in palliative care. Seeing how quickly it spread terrified me, but not nearly as much as her death. It was so hard on me and our 2 children. None of us were ready to let her go, but we didn't have a choice. Being the owner of a restaurant didn't help much either, as I was constantly bombarded with work and could barely make time to help my children work through this new and scary life that we were forced into. My son and daughter were not coping very well with things. They were very young, so I fully understood that it was very hard for them to understand how to process their mother's death. I tried my best to comfort them, but it was incredibly hard. I did get them a therapist, but even that wasn't enough. My in-laws reached out to me and offered for me to temporarily move in with them. They saw firsthand that my children were struggling, and they loved them greatly and wanted to help. I was reluctant at first, as I really didn't want to leave my home. After all, it was the one place where I felt closest to my wife. But I also knew that I needed the help, and so I moved into their home. It was a bit awkward, but I did get along quite well with both of my in-laws, especially my father-in-law, as he owned a restaurant as well. His was smaller than the one that I owned, but it was far more popular, and he did quite well for himself. We would often sit and talk about strategies to improve our businesses together. It didn't take long for me to begin noticing a positive change in my children. Time with their grandparents was doing wonders for them. Between spending time with me, therapy, and playing with their grandparents, they were finally able to act like themselves again. Around the second month, though, is when things began to take an odd turn. My brother-in-law, Greg, began acting odd and asking strange questions. "So, Austin, how long are you going to stay with my parents?" "I'm not sure, to be honest. Being here has really helped me and my kids, but it isn't going to be a permanent solution." "Sure it isn't. Just don't get any ideas about staying long-term or trying to weasel your way into our restaurant." I had no idea where this came from. Greg co-owned the restaurant that his father had started, and I knew that in the past that it bothered him when I would talk to his father about how to run a business. But I had no idea that he thought that I was trying to steal his business away from him. I tried to help him understand that I was in no way trying to usurp him. "Greg, I love your family, and your restaurant is an amazing place, but I have more than I can handle with my own business. I have no interest in trying to take yours away from you. Honestly, I'm just living here so that I can help my kids through this very challenging time. The loss of your sister hit us hard, and we're just trying to work through it, and living with your parents has helped us do that." I had told him the truth, but Greg was not convinced, and he stormed off in a huff. It was clear that he wasn't believing me, although I really didn't understand what had motivated him to think that I was trying to steal his family's business from him. It felt like he was unhinged and was seeing an enemy where there wasn't one. The next day, though, things took a bit of a turn. My father-in-law approached me and the conversation was quite uncomfortable. "Hey, Austin. So I was just wondering how business is doing." "It's okay. I've had a hard time concentrating on work since my wife passed away, but I have a great staff, and they are doing a wonderful job at keeping things flowing well." "That's good to hear. I spoke to Greg, and he had made it sound like your restaurant was about to close up shop. He made it sound like you were struggling financially." "Where did he get that idea from?" "But no. Things are difficult right now, but the business is doing well." "Glad to hear it, but should things become difficult, you can tell me. You're still family, and there is always a place for you here in my home and at my restaurant if you desire." I truly do appreciate that, but I can honestly say that Greg doesn't. He already thinks that I'm trying to take the restaurant away from him. Just then, Greg walked in, and it was clear that he had just heard everything that we had just said to one another. "I knew it! I knew that you were trying to weasel your way into the business. You can't take it away from me." Before anyone could stop him, he ran at me and punched me as hard as he could. The two of us collapsed to the ground, and he tried to keep punching me while I defended myself. My father-in-law quickly grabbed him and dragged him off of me. "Greg, what the hell do you think that you are doing? Get off of him! I knew that you loved him more than you loved me." "Well, fine. Austin, I'll make you pay for driving a wedge between my family and I." And then he stormed off. Thankfully, I wasn't hurt too badly and just had a black eye. I could have pressed charges against him, but I chose not to. However, neither my father-in-law or I could have guessed what Greg was going to do next. Several hours after he attacked me, I was getting ready for bed when the security company that monitored my restaurant sent me an alarm that someone had broken into the building. They had called the police, and they were on their way there. Terrified that my restaurant was being robbed, I got dressed and headed over to see what was going on. When I arrived, I saw that the front window of my restaurant had been shattered, and police were inside struggling to get someone under control. As I looked around, I saw that the fire department was also present, and there were several firefighters inside as well. Panic gripped my insides as I went in to find out what had happened. Inside, the scene was absolute chaos. There were tables tipped over everywhere, and Greg was there and fighting with police officers. He had assaulted an officer while they had tried to restrain him, and two had taser guns pointed at him and were threatening to shoot him if he didn't comply with their demands. The second that he saw me, he tried to rush towards me in a fit of rage and was tasered and fell to the ground unconscious. At which point, the police handcuffed him and dragged him out to their squad car. I was in a state of shock when a firefighter came over to me. "Sir, are you the owner of this restaurant?" Yes, I am." "Well, sir, we arrived in time to put the fire out before it could do any serious damage, but you will need to replace all of your table coverings as they are ruined." I found out later that apparently, Greg had broken into my restaurant and had doused all of the tablecloths in the dining area with lighter fluid and had lit a couple of them on fire. Since the security company was monitoring my restaurant, they notified both the police and the fire department of what was going on, and they saved my restaurant before any permanent damage could be done. I was beyond shocked. In the months that followed, Greg was charged with breaking and entering, destruction of private property, and arson. No one could understand why he had behaved the way that he did, but he was deemed fit to stand trial and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Both my in-laws and myself suspected that Greg had gone crazy after his sister had died, and rather than go to therapy, he had turned to drugs, which made him paranoid and unhinged. Part of me thinks that he shouldn't have gone to prison and had received mental health help. But it wasn't up to me. The sad part is that with him in prison, his father was forced to ask me to help him with their restaurant and has since made me a co-owner. I, of course, made him a co-owner of my own restaurant, though as well as a show of good faith. But with our combined efforts, we have been able to run both businesses quite well, and both are doing better than they have ever done before. I did move back home, but my children and I do visit my in-laws at least a few times a week. It is beneficial to all of us, especially since my wife is gone and Greg is in prison. They need our help and support just as much as we need theirs. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.